Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Oh my gosh, it's the last Friday of March already. Holy cow! How have we gotten
that
here?
means let's see, what is it?
Well, we're in
come
spring.
in like a lion, out like a lamb, whatever.
Yes. Anyway,
Yeah.
we are so excited here at Rural Community Solutions that you have joined us because we have a really wonderful guest today. Denise O'Brien is with us, and we're going to be with her in just a moment. But if you would like to help your community design itself to be a family-friendly, youth-centered place that thrives, we would love to talk to you. That's what our show is all about. For rural communities, about rural communities.
We help rural communities build an entrepreneurial environment, an environment that will help support entrepreneurs, because that's the economy that a rural area needs to support. So stick around. We're going to continue our conversations about building entrepreneurship and how that helps rural America.
Picture, if you will, the pure, raw prairie. No wires, no fences, no roads, not even a farmhouse. No sign of civilization. This is what a person saw that was crossing the prairie in a wagon more than 170 years ago. They jumped off the wagon, looked around, and declared, "This is where I want to settle and build a town. A great place to live and a great place to raise my family." So they took a risk. They built a house made out of the land, planted food to eat, and cared for the land. Then they wrote back to their friends where they came from and described the great opportunity and promise that they have found. They invited who they knew to join them in their discovery, people they had a relationship with, and so they came, family by family, and those families invited others they knew, who they wanted to live with within that community. The communities grew because the needs of the families grew, so entrepreneurs started businesses to meet those community needs. Ice houses, broom factories, general stores, and many other types of sole proprietor entrepreneurial businesses started up within the community. All of our communities across this country, all around the world, were started in this way, with a vision of the future and a plan to grow with people.
And today is literally growing, because we are so excited that Denise O'Brien, who happens to be a dear friend of ours, who lives here in our county, Cass County in Southwest Iowa. Denise is joining us for our interview as part of our continuing celebration of Women's History Month. Welcome, Denise.
Hey, Kim and Frank. Thanks for inviting me.
We are so excited to have you be here. Just as some background for you who have not yet had the absolute distinct pleasure of meeting and knowing Denise. Denise is a farmer. She and her husband, Larry Harris, have led the organic farming movement in Iowa and beyond, I suspect would be an accurate statement. She has lived practicing what she preaches. Man, this woman has done it all of her life. She's a wife, she's a grandmother, she's an activist. She has helped start a number of very positive, wonderful organizations and agencies, like the Woman Food and Agriculture Network is one of the leading organizations. She's been a founder. We could just go on and on. She's won awards. She's been in the Iowa Women's Hall of Fame. She's just a leader.
Read about her in the show notes, actually.
That's exactly right. So we're really more interested in hearing what Denise has to say. So accolades, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and Denise, you're one of the founding families in this area. You're still living on, just like our opening video says, they jumped off the wagon and here's this land, this where I want to send my town. You're actually one of the founding families in Cass County and still live on some of that land.
Well, the Harrises are. The O'Briens are, moved here when I was in the early 50s. But Larry's family, my husband's family, yes, they settled a mile from south of here, and it's a heritage farm, so it's over 150 years old. And I want to acknowledge those that were here before the Harrises and the people who were the original people on the land. I think it's one of those things that we need to deal with in acknowledging that as people spread through manifest destiny over the United States, many people were displaced. And so in our part of the state, it was the Iowa Indians that were the original people. It was a hunter-gatherer. There weren't many that were settlers, but and now Iowa has the Meskwaki that are in the Sac and Fox that are in Tama County, and they own their own land. So I just want to acknowledge that, because Larry's family, yes, has been here for over 150 years. The farmstead is called Harrisdale, and Harrisdale actually was founded. It was a rail crossing because they were next to the railroad, the only farmer-owned railroad in the United States that was from Atlantic to Kimballton. And it's really interesting looking at the history of that the farmers put up the money to make the railroad go from Atlantic to Kimballton. And there are stories in the Harris family of Larry's aunts hopping on the train to go into Atlantic. And Atlantic is 6 miles away for us, but and people who were on this farm that Larry's parents bought in 1949 after World War II, the original people on this farm were actually, we found out when we started farming, we started diversifying, when we started raising strawberries and raspberries and that. So anyway, one day somebody came to pick strawberries, and she had grown up on this farm, and she was just elated that we were growing strawberries. She said, "Oh, when we were little, we picked strawberries and we put them on the train and sent them into Atlantic." So we unknowingly took this farm back to one of its original diverse type of farming that was practiced many years ago. So that was a fun story to know. And yeah, the settling of this area, brought railroads, roads, and everything else. So it's been fun to be a part of that family.
So the entire family then has actually been entrepreneurial, all the way along. If that was settling land, I mean, can you think of anything that's more entrepreneurial than that? Wow, so that's just amazing. Well, let's go into a little bit of your journey. Let's just start with organic farming. Why in the world, in a state like Iowa, where we do beans and corn, why in the world would you buck tradition? Don't we feed the world? And where did you think that using organic farming was perhaps a better way to approach farming the land?
Oh, good questions, Kim. And actually, I feel that the person who really should answer these questions is Larry, who's outside working and doing his stuff. I married Larry in 1976, and when I met him, he came from this farm. I was a town girl. I didn't know that much about farming, but I was attracted to gardening and things that we did in my family. So when I met Larry, he said he had, after he dropped out of college after a couple of years, went traveling around the United States and worked in Colorado. And when he was in the mines underground in Colorado, decided that he wanted to do something and come back to the farm and convince his uncle and his father, who farmed together, to do organic farming. So he thought about that in 1975. I fell in love with the guy who thought that and followed his dream, and that became my dream, and a really good fit, because, as I said, I feel like I had some attraction to the land. And prior to that, I had been traveling around the United States. I'd been doing different things, but always it seemed like people would associate me with Mother Earth, and so there were genes that gave that away. So Larry said he didn't want to be a corn and bean farmer. He said he wanted to plant grains and be an organic farmer. And so, I had no idea. So, and we had no place like this internet, this incredible technology to find out how we did this. We had the Rodale farm in Pennsylvania, and we had really thick books. I'm not sure they're on this bookshelf, on identification of insects and compost books, and and we set out to try to find some farmers in Iowa who were organic, and we found two. We found one up in Carroll and one over in Grinnell, and we visited both farms, and so we just did. It went by our guts. And Larry, I like I say, he intuitively knew how to do some of these things because coming with his family that lived in this neighborhood, he had two other uncles. So the three Harris families lived in the neighborhood and did things as used to be done. They shared equipment, they shared labor, they did all these. Larry was, I think, in 8 years old or so before he realized that his cousins were cousins and not brothers and sisters, because they had birthdays and everything all together. So they, having learned from his father and his uncles about crop rotation, about diversified farming, everybody had some cows, pigs, chickens. Everybody had those things then. It started dying out in the 50s after World War II. And into the 60s and then into the 70s, as we became more specialized and less diversified. And that movement from that time has brought us to where we are now in Iowa, that is not in a good place. Our water isn't healthy, our soil isn't healthy, our air isn't healthy. And one of the ways that we can reverse that to fit in with the entrepreneurial theme is to have smaller farms that raise food for people to eat, because as you stated earlier, Kim, feed the world it's a myth. We don't feed the world. We grow corn and beans in Iowa that feed the livestock industry and the ethanol industry. And until we become so concentrated in our meat production that it's really become a problem. And the vertical integration of the hogs and the chickens, which means that the hogs are owned from the very beginning to the very end, and the people who take care of them are the caretakers. They're not really farmers, they're caretakers. They go in and they're managers, and the managers hire people to go into those hog factories and chicken factories and take care of them. So we have a system that's an assembly line, a system that involves some people, but less people than agriculture could. And so it's one of those things that a lot of people now are trying to start smaller farms. And Iowa just actually is on the verge of passing a law about processing, about putting more money into regional and local processing, and connecting with community colleges to do a butchering. We need this stuff. They're doing it in New York City. They're teaching butchery classes in New York City. And here we are in Iowa, where we raise the livestock and that, and we're running out of, we're out of processing places. We're lucky in Cass County. We have 3, Anita and 2 in Atlantic. And in fact, the meat locker called me yesterday and said, your beef is ready. And I buy my beef from 20 miles from here. And I have a freezer that we can put a half of beef in, and we share it with our family. We buy 3 families, buy the meat together and store it, and we're supporting our local farmers. And that's exactly what Larry and I dreamed about when we first started, was about local foods, and without really knowing much about it, but we really felt like we needed to do something in that line. So that's that story.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch in there that I want to dissect here and to take apart. But you started this just prior to the farm crisis of the 80s, and that's really when the agricultural shift started to take place, where larger farmers got large because smaller farmers were in debt and they had to lose their farms. Many did lose their farms, but then you were still fighting, if you will, if I can use that term, fighting to be organic, fighting all the big boys that were trying to change the system on that. And so that's what we call the leading edge can be bloody at times. And you have really been one of those change agents that have stuck to your values, stuck to where the land is, and have really kind of bucked that change. So being a change bucker, if you will.
Okay, I like that. That sounds like a bumper sticker.
That's right. How has how is that really? I mean, because sometimes you just dig in your heels, and I admire that about you of how we can change.
Yeah.
How we have to keep fighting to change with our values, and sometimes buck the culture that is being grown by the majority of people.
Yes, and I have to give honor to you saying the big boys, because it has been the big boys. There's been hardly any women in my work with women in agriculture. There have been hardly any women on boards of banks or corporations or that making these decisions. But well, I just have to say that Larry, you know, he was strong enough to buck the trend. I mean, he rode the school buses every day with his neighbors. His neighbors didn't become organic farmers. It's occurred to me in a later life, in later years, how strong he has been to not give in to peer pressure, and to know that what he was doing and it was totally out of line with what is normal or what is in line, and has stood up to that. So I've admired that more as I've grown older, because no one else chose to take that path in our neighborhood. It's been very rare that it's happened, but we can feel good about we have become a safe haven. Our 17 acres that we now farm, we farmed up to about 425 acres at one time when we had a cow calf operation, and then we went to dairy, and that we now feel like we are a biodiverse, a sanctuary for those all those critters that are around there that have no shelter anymore. So we have a lot of insects. We have a lot of good and bad insects, and they keep in balance. I don't have a lot of issues in my vegetable growing about insects taking over. We don't have disease. We have butterflies, we have pollinators, we have birds. We have a good number of species of birds, because this is the only place in a big area that those critters can come and feel safe. So I really have to give credit to Larry for that, and then all the reading, and then how we grew together as a farmers, and how I felt I had with him a 2-year apprenticeship. I really felt this very strongly. Before we had kids, and before I felt good about calling myself a farmer, he taught me how to operate the tractor, how to, plant seed, how to read the weather, all the things that he grew up with, and he knew from his family. When people start to farm now, they don't have these. Even the farmers that are farming the larger areas that are only farming and don't have livestock don't have this indigenous knowledge about what to do when the sun comes up, and I think it's really important. I learned from him in that way, and after 2 years apprenticeship, we planted raspberries and strawberries and asparagus and apple trees, and offered those, and had 3 children, and we offered those to our local community. And the strawberries, I must say, were the biggest hit of all, and people still talk about our strawberries, and we don't do so much of strawberries anymore. They are high maintenance, and we branched off into other things. And so I'm still thinking about how, and looking at how I could grow strawberries. And my latest thing is, and a lot of people do it this way, is putting up A-frames and putting rain gutter along the A-frames and growing the strawberries above ground, but in soil that's in those rain gutters. that are attached to the A-frame.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. My strawberry picking is very limited, but the day that I did it actually on Harrisdale property, it was rainy and they were mush because they were on the ground. So I completely get that. So let's put a pin in that. I do want to just kind of circle into this whole idea. Even though Iowa and surrounding your neighborhood is traditional farming, and traditional, for those of you who are not farmers, would mean corn and soybeans, growing those crops. Do you see a place? I mean, obviously those are needed commodities, but what sort of balance is there? Because we want to recognize that there is, a lot of value, for Iowa's agricultural economy and the global economy for those crops. So where as you have evolved in your organic farming practice and led the way, how have you kind of either reconciled or how would you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kim. And I think, yes, I believe that the biggest gap we have now in agriculture are the medium-sized farms, the farms that would be able to be a diversified livestock and crop farm. We have eliminated a lot of the livestock into buildings, and we've turned all of our land into assembly line production that has a formula and specialization, and they have special machineries. So, and ag policy, I have to bring in here, ag policy has encouraged that. When the policy at the federal level has encouraged farms to get bigger. That started in with Earl Butz that said, "Get bigger or get out," and it was all basically to structure agriculture for the corporations to be able to move the grain. And so we've eliminated so many jobs and things in that process. So the middle-sized farms are the ones that 500 to 600 acres. I mean, that's even sounds big to me. But farmers now are farming thousands of acres, and they have, because land is still owned by families or individuals of families, they have a lot of landlords, I think, and landladies. And so their work to produce corn and beans on margins that aren't profitable, they have to deal with they have to put together the pieces of their farm to make several thousand acres. And then they have to have the machinery, and they have to have the rental agreements, and they have to have that, everything to just have a marginal profit. And that's what our national policy has designed. And I believe truly that farmers would rather farm smaller amounts of land and do a good job rather than the thousands of acres that they're having to take care of. But we need good federal policy that will change that, and to have what I remarked the other day, what really is amazing to me in the farming over the years is the entrepreneurs, as you said, the inventors, what comes out of, so you need something to do, to pull a nail in a certain way. So you invent what you use. It's not somebody else that's going to invent it. And resourcefulness. I always tell the story of making fence with Larry's dad, Lyle. We'd be out there making fence. He would pull a nail out of the fence post. He would take that nail, being a child of the Depression, and on top of that fence post, he would pound out and make it straight. We have cans of straightened nails that you reuse. Wow, what a thing we could have if people remain doing that instead of our disposable society that throws things away. But that gets me a little bit away from the middle-sized farm. We really need diversity, and we don't have an infrastructure that fits that anymore. So this, like this processing plant, we need more of those, because we found with COVID a year ago that people couldn't buy things at the grocery store chains, that the meat packing plants that were doing all this, that had to shut down, or they kept their workers working through COVID, but people couldn't get things. And so people started looking to local farmers and saying, wow, we want to buy a beef. We want to buy a pork. We want to buy chicken. And the farmers couldn't find dates at the processing places that existed to have their butchering done.
Right.
And now even those butchering dates are into 2022.
Yeah.
Most of my friends make their schedule, whether or not they're going to have animals, or if they know that the animals will be ready at the time, they're making their schedules a year ahead of time, that first week in January. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's great business, but it's also then says, yes, there's room for more.
And what dawned on me is, we talk about the corn and soybean growers right now as traditional farming. That's not true. Your traditional farming.
Yes.
I mean, when you go back to our initial one, they jumped off that wagon and they said, this is where I'll start my town. They started their farm, and they had to grow their own food. And then the towns grew up around the farms to take care of the farmers, supply their needs, so the farmers could come into town, buy what they needed, go back, raise their crops.
Right.
And it's really upside down. So I'm going to call you the traditional farmer, and where we are right now in those farming practices, the non-traditional farmers, and that has created the opportunity. And I think, I mean, everything in time is on a pendulum, and we're starting to swing back. Because kids in New York think that food's growing at the grocery store. They,
excuse me, Atlantic.
Well, and people now are realizing the value of local foods, and we're having produce in the park, and communities are having local food vendors. I mean, Des Moines has a local food that has kind of commercialized now and gotten away from the true aspect of it. But people are almost demanding to know, where is my food being grown? And COVID started that snowball a little bit bigger and faster. And we talked to a guy from Wyoming, a friend of ours from Riverton, Wyoming, and they did the same thing. And in fact, a couple of years ago, their herd people, their cattle producers out there, had to truck their herds into Colorado to be processed.
Yes.
So they did approach their local community college, and they created the first in the nation mobile butcher.
Butchering. Yes.
On that. And then they said, okay, well, we need to train our butchers. So the community college, but now there's a company that is growing up that will do about 50 head a month, I think. And then it's custom meat. They'll be able to ship it globally because they're building the building right next to the airport. So it'll be a global custom pack, custom meat cutting based upon the local needs. And I think that's where we need to go back. So describe just a little bit of your farm, because I think when people think of local growers and where our gardens are, you really have.
You have a garden.
It's lucky that we got Denise at this time of year, because until now, until about November,
right?
You'll be seeing her on her hands and knees picking things.
Yeah. Well, so our farm we've always had diversity, because when Larry helped his father with the farm, had cattle and had hogs. That's how we started farming, was with hogs. And it used to be that hogs was the way beginning farmers started. They were the mortgage burners. You could have 2 litters a year with lots of pigs, and you could sell them in 6 months, and you could keep the sows, breed them again, and keep going, and that would be, and pay your bills while you're waiting for the crops to come in, or the cattle that take longer to grow, and that. So those were the mortgage burners that don't exist anymore. What I think are farms that are small vegetable farms, and small could be 10 to 20, 10 to 50 acres and that, but that grow vegetables. And the way that the vegetable industry has changed, the tools and the manufacturing, the processing, things like that, is remarkable for when we started. The other thing that's remarkable is that there's a lot more regulations. It used to be, and the regulations, unfortunately, are made for the bigger producers, the bigger companies that are the ones that have E. coli problems and that sort of thing, and they have to have the recalls. We don't find that when we grow local food. It's the meat locker doesn't have to call back the meat that they've just sold, or the farmer. It probably has happened, but not on the scale that it does. And so diversity, our farm, we have chickens, and we're downsizing now. Larry and I are at the point where, and we've taken on a big project to build this house that's made of straw, and
it's so cool, everybody.
Yeah.
That's a whole different show. We'll do another
Yeah.
show on your straw house.
Maybe we could do the show from the straw bale house.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
that'd be great.
We have what's called a high tunnel, and it's a unheated greenhouse. It's 72 feet long and 30 feet wide, and it's 21 square feet, and we can grow crops in there into December, and we can start crops in there. I've got crops growing right now that I planted in early March. So we can tackle this extended season. We can tackle the problem of not having enough to go year round by having a high tunnel. And high tunnels are something that really work well to be able to, like, I can plant spinach in the fall and have spinach. We're eating spinach right now. And we were a couple weeks ago. Kim, you gave a sign.
Well, I did, and it's just because I was looking at the math wasn't working for me. 21 square feet in a building.
I think
that's
it's 2,100.
2,100.
Okay, I was thinking,
bad now.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That was it. Before we left, yeah. I thought I gotta get the answer to this one.
Yes. Well, and I can grow carrots into the winter there. The root crops do well there. So and we also got a grant from the Natural Resources Conservation Service for putting up that building. So there's different protocols in different counties, but the NRCS has that ability to give grants to farmers or low interest loans. But so to put our high tunnel up, and we got the Cadillac we wanted to have, and we also got we got a movable one. So we have a track where we can move our tunnel back east and west, and have basically two high tunnels on one track. So we move it in April to grow summer crops, and we move it in the fall to grow winter crops, and then it gives the ground a rest and things. So
that's cool. I did not realize that. Next time we come out, I want to see the track. But we have just a few minutes left, and that's just amazing. One of the things that because it's Women's History Month, and because you have led the way as a female entrepreneur, one of the fascinating things I find in Iowa, and because you're part of the Women Food and Agriculture Network, I'm sure you have a handle on this across the country. Talk about who's owning the land. You mentioned it a little while ago, but I'd like to just bring that to light, because farming has been male dominated, which is fine. But what's happening now?
Yeah, and male dominated in the United States. When I first got into farming, I looked for case studies of women in the United States who were farmers, and all I could find were Africa, India, and all these other places. And I think we've increased that now over the years. But women through women live longer than men, and so through inheritance, women have received a lot of farmland, and from fathers or husbands and siblings have received land together. Women have received it by themselves. There's a woman right now from California who's moving to Iowa because her father, who was not an Iowan, was a veterinary, and he thought buying land in Iowa was a good thing. So she's moving here and she's doing incredible things on her land. But Women, Food, and Agriculture started working with women in Cass County, Iowa, in 1998 to identify where they got their information, how they got their information, and how they made decisions about their farm. And most of the feedback we got from those women were that when they walked into a government service agency, the eyes would roll because they would have questions to ask, and people didn't want to take time to ask those questions. And that if they went to farm meetings that was male dominated, they were perceived, if they were a widow, they were perceived as looking for a husband. And
oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. And these
seriously?
Oh yes. Wow. And the women who also
first dating site. So
and women that really and the thing is that, and we heard this and we still hear this, is that before their spouse is buried in the ground, people are knocking on their door and saying, I want to rent your farmland because land is so valuable and I'll take care of you. I'll do all this stuff. And women have been vulnerable to these things. So Women, Food, and Agriculture started this women caring for the land, and teaching women about natural resources and about things that they kind of knew because their husbands were conservationists. Some women were farmers, some women were strong, and they knew what they wanted to do with that land. But most women would give it up to the tenant to make decisions, and the tenant probably was a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a nephew, and the tenant always, even if the woman wanted to have natural resource stuff, the men would mansplain that they didn't know anything and that they knew what to do. So their farming paths were different. The farmers, because of our farm policy, they've been victims of farm policy, had to farm a certain way. And the women who wanted to have buffer strips, they wanted to plant trees, they wanted waterways, all those sort of things, lost out. And so this program, it just has been wonderful to have women become empowered. And we did that with learning circles. Women sat together and talked and empathized with what their situation were. And this was a group that the learning circles were very interesting because we decided when we were looking at all this that men go to the elevator and they learn about what rental prices are. They learn all that stuff. They go to the bar, they go to the cafe, and they talk farming. But women, they go to church, they go to PTA, they go to different things, and they don't talk farming. They talk about the community and kids and things like that. So there's no place for women in a community to find out information about how they can manage their farms. So these learning circles really fulfilled a place for women to be able to say, well, this is the price of rent that I'm going to charge, or where can I find the answer to this, and if I do this to my land, what will be the repercussions? There's some incredible farm women who are not farmers but landowners in Iowa that have restored prairie, that have done cover crops, that say to their tenant, this is what I want to do. And women were timid about that. They're thinking that they'd lose their tenant, not understanding that there was a list probably 25 people long that were ready to do what that woman wanted to do on her land in order to have that land to farm.
Wow.
So we think about all these big farms. So what percentage of land is owned by women right now?
I think it's like 51%, and that's nationwide. Iowa is high because of the small sizes of farms and that. But yeah, women own, and we're not making decisions about the land. And I drive down the road and I think, wow, what would this landscape look like if women were making decisions?
Yeah, that's and the average farmer across the nation, for those of you that don't follow it, I believe is right around 54, 55 years of age. on there. So it is an elderly population because the farms are getting bigger and fewer farms, but the same amount of land. And so that ownership then gets older and older, but the ownership is starting to move away from the traditional farmer as it was. Just like in Main Street now, the owners of the Main Street businesses are moving away from the first generation of that. So this is why we start to focus on how do you get back to entrepreneurship? What is entrepreneurship? What is that creativity? And you're so good about sharing your knowledge and empowering other people as a true leader. I mean, not just around our community, but nationally and internationally. And you spent a year in Afghanistan training women over there how to be farmers. And I just think that is so amazing.
Well, let me tell you, Frank, I wasn't teaching them how to be farmers because they already knew. And what I found being there, I feel like this when we go to different countries and take our way of farming to other countries, we don't go with a respect for their traditional ways that they've farmed. And so when I was in Afghanistan, a lot of people out of extension would come, and they just really wanted people to plant in straight rows, and they wanted them to use this amount of fertilizer, and they wanted them to follow a recipe for things, when people in other countries had their ways of farming that interspersed companion planting, and they had an indigenous knowledge that still exists that maybe didn't produce like we wanted to produce in the United States, but we've overproduced in the United States. So then we go and we dump our commodities on other countries and make it so that it's cheaper for those other countries to buy our grain rather than to grow it themselves. So we've caused a real, disruption in the world economy when people are not growing their own food with their knowledge. We can always improve. We can improve with hybrids. We can do that. It's not that they know everything from the beginning, but they know the cultural and traditional ways of doing their farming, and maybe they need help learning to form a cooperative so they can have a business model. Maybe they need help improving some insect control or something, but all farmers need that. So we look at other farmers in other countries as not knowing as much as we, because we are we're number one. I was number one in hogs and corn and beans, but look, we have population that's leaving. We have populations that's aging, and what can we do to help people understand that Iowa is a place they want to come to? We need to create those entrepreneurial opportunities for people to want to come to Iowa, and that means that we have to do a lot more regulation on the concentration of the livestock industry that's causing major problems and keeping people out of agriculture rather than bringing them in.
Yeah, and sometimes when somebody from a metro area wants to move to a rural area, rural areas have specific smells that are opposite of what you might find in a downtown metro area. And we'll growing up, I grew up in western South Dakota, so that's kind of cattle country too. But going across this and working in rural development for the last 35 years, I've understood that when you go through a smell, we always just turn that phrase around as, oh, that's the smell of money. And that is, that's somebody's livelihood, but you have to understand what you're moving into that environment. But also, if we want to grow, because we live in a county, as you well know, we live in a county that hasn't grown in population for more than 100 years.
Right.
And so to attract people, we need to work together on changing some of the cultural aspects of rural America or of our rural community so we can cohabitate. And I think that is, we're talking about cultures, we're talking about families that go back 150 to 200 years here, and we've always done it this way before. Why would I change if it's working and all that other stuff? So I love the opportunity for the women's circles and how people learn. And I think we can take in communities, we can take a lot of that, and just by sitting down and talking through issues instead of just talking about them.
Right, because we all want a healthy community. We want our children to be around, all of those things. And Frank, just to mention on when you're talking about the smell of money, it used to be that was a really, when you drove by a cattle yard or a pig yard or whatever, it used to be that they were small enough that you drove through them very quickly and you didn't have that. Now, if you drive along Interstate 35 going north and south, you have hog operations that fill the air, and there's no relief from that. And that's the concentration of animals off from the land. Animals help the land. And we need to change the way some things are done. And those people that have lived on the land but now have a hog factory across the street from them every day, I'm glad that we don't, have become imprisoned in their homes because of the smell. And so there's some, but what you're saying with talking about learning circles and that, if we sit and talk about what our values are, what we want in our rural community, family, schools, churches, and things, we'd all come out on the same page. We end up, working in different directions about how to make that happen So I really believe that we need, I think there's going to be a lot of look at the concentration of the livestock industry, and that if we can unconcentrate it, if we can diversify it a little bit more, there's going to be new opportunities. And there are people out there who want to farm. And there's an immigrant population that come from an agrarian culture that would love to have some land in Iowa. But when you have acreages that people are just going to live out in the country on and not utilize the land for, $200,000 and $300,000 and $400,000, and you eliminate people's opportunities to have access to land, and access to land is a major problem.
Yeah, as we could go on and on and on about this. I mean, this is really important, and the engagement factor, sitting down, having communities have that conversation, that engagement, it's one of our pillars of how we develop that community and stuff like that. Well, Denise, we really appreciate the time that you have taken, and yes, we will take you up on the offer to come out and do a show from the Straw House. It's this isn't the storybook Straw House, guys.
No,
this is
it sure is. No, Big Bad Wolf's going to blow this puppy down.
Yeah, no kidding.
But on behalf of our daughter-in-law, who is taking over her family farm here in Cass County, we are so proud of her. And so it is yesterday we talked about business succession, community succession, So anyway, that's one of the, I guess, elements that we're talking about here is how to transfer a farm into new ownership. So we're so grateful to have your expertise, your knowledge, your history, your passion, everything that you have
your
lived.
Friendship too.
Absolutely.
I mean, this has been great.
It's vice versa. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're gonna be continuing with Denise. We're going to have her back on the show because there's so much more we can pick her brain about, and the expertise going down the policy route, as she is the newly elected chair of our county party, Democratic Party, and we are so hopeful on the building of that and where that can go in helping new policy development and helping rural America. With that on how we there seems like to be a new focus on building rural America these days. It's so refreshing after 30 years. I mean,
So
but
Denise,
thank you, Denise. We really appreciate it.
So you stick with us for just a second, and we'll be right back with you.
Okay.
All right, guys. Yeah. So go ahead and unpack all that.
Wow, what a lot of information Denise has offered with us. For those of you who maybe just kind of jumped in, we're so grateful for Denise O'Brien to have been with us today Denise has led the way in the organic farming movement and all kinds of things, local, national, and global. So we'll have her back, but we're so grateful that she joined us and that you have joined us here at Rural Community Solutions. If you'd like to get home, where are we going to pop in
That's
together?
right.
So if
We don't have a teleprompter that
No,
says,
we
you
don't.
say
We
this,
don't.
this, say that.
Yeah, we just wing this. So if you'd like to get hold of us, we would love to have a conversation with you about connecting you with Denise about anything for your rural community that you feel needs to be addressed so that you can design a family-friendly, youth-centered place that thrives. So you can find us at frank@ghorizons.com or kim@ghorizons.com. We are here Monday through Friday at 11:30 Central Daylight Time on YouTube and Facebook at Rural Community Solutions TV. Or you can catch our podcast at anchor.fm/Frank Spillers and look for Think Like an Entrepreneur, Become a Spark Plug.
So if you're looking to build a foundation that supports entrepreneurs and become a startup community, give us a holler. We'd love to help you. So until then, until Monday, we will see you on Monday, 11:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time as we continue celebrating women entrepreneurs. So,
yes, we will have Gloria Russell with us on Monday, and she'll help us figure out how you can write great copy for your website and your resume.
remember, words matter. So have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you on Monday.
Thanks for joining us. Take
Bye-bye.
care.